Hello guys, this is your friend. We are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Kushina survived Kurama's attack but was outcast from the village with Naruto, part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start a new fanfic. An agonizing scream reverberated off the damp stone walls of the cave while the flickering light from the fire revealed the 4 people there. The first was a young woman with long red hair and a swollen belly. This woman's name was Uzumaki Kushina. Her face was contorted in agony as her muscles contracted once again as her body continued to push the matured baby out and into the world. Right beside her was an equally young man named Namikaze Minato, his spiky blonde hair disheveled and matted against his face as he poured his chakra into the seal on Kushina's stomach in an effort to strengthen it long enough for her to give birth. When Kushina let out another scream of pain, Minato started to panic over his wife's safety. "Can't you two do something about the pain?" he shouted to the 2 medic nins overseeing his son's birth while his panicked mind disrupted his chakra flow to the seal. "Stop whining, Minato. You're the Yondaime Hokage, so pull yourself together and do your job," snapped the older of the 2 medics. Her long gray hair was pulled back into a ponytail which gave Minato an unobstructed view of her skull. A shiver ran up his spine as his mind ran through all the possibilities that she would do to him if he didn't get better control over his emotions. He took a deep calming breath, and as he went back to his task at hand he said, all right. Man Bawako, you can be real forceful when you want to be, huh?" For the next several minutes after their little banter, the only sounds that could be heard in the cave were the grunts and groans of Kushina until at last the small cry of a newborn baby reverberated throughout the cave. As Bawako wrapped the baby in a linen cloth, her medical assistant looked up at the newly crowned mother and excitedly shouted, "Congratulations Kushina-sama, it's a boy." A big cheeky grin spread across Kushina's exhausted and pained face, and as tears welled up in her eyes she reached out towards her baby with a shaky hand. "Naruto, my boy, my little baby boy." This happy moment was not destined to last, however, for not a moment after those words left Kushina's mouth both Bawako and her assistant's eyes rolled into the back of their heads before they fell to the ground to reveal a black cloaked man that wore a red mask with a signal eye hole in it, and this man was holding the baby Naruto in his hands. How he managed to grab Naruto without anyone noticing was a complete mystery. As Minato reached for his kunai pouch, the masked man pulled out a kunai of his own and placed it against baby Naruto's throat as he said, "I wouldn't do that, Yondaime. Now hand over the Kyuubi vessel or say goodbye to your son." Ignoring the warning he had just received, Minato appeared behind the masked man in a bright yellow flash and moved to take Naruto while at the same time striking the hostage taker. But much to Minato's surprise, his strike passed right through the man's body as if it wasn't even there. When his fist passed clean through the assailant's body, he noticed that his son had also passed through the man's hand and was falling towards the rocky floor. Minato's parental instincts kicked in at this moment, but even as he tried to catch his son, the masked man reached out with his left hand and grabbed a hold of Minato's Jonin vest before he created a spiraling vortex from the opening in his mask and sucked Minato into oblivion. "Minato-kun!" screamed Kushina as she watched in abject horror at the scene in front of her and cursed her weakened state. Meanwhile, the masked man grabbed Naruto just before he hit the ground, and as he pulled him into a firm grip he said, Now, we can't have anything happen to you yet. After all, we wouldn't want mommy to get any ideas, would we?" Kushina let out a low growl at the implied threat, but when she saw him tighten his grip on the baby's throat she let out a sigh and lowered her head in defeat. The man quickly appeared right beside her and placed his free hand over top of the seal on Kushina's stomach. Excruciating pain coursed through Kushina's body as the Kyuubi was forcibly ripped from her body, and as her world began to fade into darkness she distinctly heard the sound of a newborn baby's neck being snapped. "Naruto!" screamed Kushina as she shot up from her sleeping bag, a cold sweat pouring off her face. Wiping the perspiration from her brow, she took a few moments to gain her bearings. A dream, it was just a dream. She kept muttering to herself for the next several minutes in an effort to collect her thoughts and calm herself down. Once she was cool and collective, she slowly surveyed her surroundings. The first thing she noticed was how the early morning sun seemed to give the simple tan cloth that made up the outside of the tent a warm orange glow. The next thing she noticed were two dark tan traveling packs partially opened to reveal all the necessities one would need when planning to be away from home for a while. Then her eyes fell upon an empty sleeping bag that was right next to her. Her eyes widened slightly and she jumped out of her own sleeping bag and ran outside, grabbing her staff on the way out. A cool morning breeze blew across her face as she exited the tent and surveyed the wooded area they had decided to camp for the night. When she saw no sign of the person she was looking for, her worry turned into a deep sense of dread, and as she strapped her staff onto her back she grumbled, "Damn it, Naruto. Where the hell are you?" Meanwhile, as the sun started to shine through the trees in another part of the forest, signifying the start of a new day, a young spiky-haired blonde no older than 16 sat perched on a branch that was completely shrouded in shadows. This teenager's name was Uzumaki Naruto, and he was covertly observing a lone traveler. The traveler in question was walking along the only dirt road that led safely out of the forest. He watched her with such skill in the art of stealth that it would make most veteran shinobi green with envy. She's no ordinary traveler, that's for sure, he thought to himself as his eyes narrowed and he began to study this traveler in greater detail. Her red hair that was similar in color to his mother's was the first thing that drew his attention, followed by her blue dress, but what really caught his eye was the fishnet stockings and shin guards, indicating to him that she was no simple villager. Is she a bandit, a mercenary, or perhaps even a shinobi? Thought Naruto as he noticed that her movements were too fluid and well-timed, and while it did give off the appearance of a relaxed traveler, the reality of it was that this traveler was ready to strike at any given moment. You know, it's considered impolite for little boys to be peeking on older women, whispered a voice directly behind Naruto, who spun around so fast that a normal person would have gotten dizzy only to see the very same woman he was watching just a moment ago. Quickly turning back toward the road, his eyes widened in shock when all he saw was a small puddle of water where the red-haired woman once was before, he thought, Mizu Bunshin. Shit. Not one to waste an opportunity such as this. The red-haired woman immediately moved to strike Naruto, only to be surprised when he seemingly faded out of existence. Her eyes instantly moved to her left where she saw that the teen had just landed on a tree branch only a few yards away. He's fast, the red-haired lady thought to herself before a smile graced her lips as she muttered, it may be worthwhile to recruit him. But just to be sure, I think a little test is in order, muttered the woman as she appeared beside Naruto and went to deliver a kick to the back of his head, but just as her foot was about to make contact, Naruto stepped off the branch. When the branch pasted by his chest, he swiftly twirled around and grabbed a hold of it. Using this momentum to his advantage, Naruto swung a full 360 degrees around and landed a mule kick to the red-haired lady's back, which sent the surprised woman sailing towards the ground below. However, just before she collided with the ground, she twisted her body and gracefully landed on her feet, making it appear as if it was just another day at the office. Naruto, however, wasn't impressed with her display. Instead, he looked at her with a critical eye as he thought to himself, yup, definitely a shinobi, and a very skilled one too. I know those hits connected, and yet she acts like it didn't even faze her. His eyes widened dramatically as a sudden realization accrued to him. Maybe she's even skilled enough to. They then narrowed dangerously at that thought, and as he glared at the woman he growled, "Where's Nei-chan?" "What? Nei-chan?" questioned the woman as her eyes darted from left to right as if she was searching her memory for any recollection of such a person. After only a few seconds of contemplation, she turned toward Naruto and said, "What the hell are you talking about?" Her denial of his accusation only seemed to anger Naruto further, and as he shot off the tree branch he shouted, "Don't lie to me." The red-haired woman just barely moved her head out of the way as Naruto's fist grazed her left cheek. Tired of just being on the defensive, the woman twisted her body and landed a spinning heel kick to Naruto's back, which sent him stumbling forward. After he recovered his balance, Naruto quickly spun around to face his opponent, all the while mentally berating himself for letting his emotions get the best of him and not following his Nei-chan's motto, only ask questions when in interrogation. Steeling himself with this new resolve, he shifted his weight so he could easily respond to any situation that presented itself and just started down the woman, looking for any sign of her next move. Meanwhile, the red-haired beauty was making some observations of her own, and when she took a closer look at Naruto's stance, she was surprised by what she found. While his style was loose and appeared sloppy, yet somehow oddly familiar, her keen sense of observation couldn't detect any openings in it. It was as if he was prepared for any type of taijutsu attack. A smirk spread across her face as a sudden idea popped into her head. After a quick scan of the area, her eyes fell upon a small pond, and as her smirk grew even bigger, she thought to herself, well, if a direct taijutsu attack won't work, let's see how he handles this. She flew through a series of hand seals so fast that if one would have blinked they would have missed it, and once the last seal was formed, water erupted from the pond and formed a giant dragon's head before it arced back around and charged toward Naruto, its watery teeth glistening in the morning sunlight. As the dragon approached, Naruto's loose combat stance suddenly hardened and his eyes took on a look of intense concentration, almost as if he was focusing every fiber of his being into his next move. Naruto suddenly jumped into the air, and as he came back down he twisted his body so that he did a heel drop to the dirt below. At first the red-haired woman thought the teen had lost his mind performing a move like that against a water dragon, but as she studied him further she noticed an odd distortion moving rapidly toward her own attack. Upon closer examination of the distortion, she noticed that though it was small in its width, its height was easily twice the size of her, clear evidence that it was loaded with Naruto's chakra. Her eyes widened as a thought crossed her mind. Could that be some kind of wind attack, or is it strictly chakra-based? Her question was quickly answered when the two jutsus collided with each other, and for the briefest of moments she thought that perhaps she was wrong, but as Naruto's attack started to cut its way through the water dragon, sending the water spraying both to the left and the right of the attack, she was forced to reconsider that thought. When the attack finally cut its way completely through the water dragon, it didn't stop there as one would expect it to. Instead, it continued on its course of destruction, and its course took it on a collision course with the female beauty. But at the last second she jerked her body to the right, and just in time too, as the blade of wind blasted right by mere inches from her face. In fact, it took a few strands of her red hair in the process. As the hairs floated to the ground, she whipped her head back around toward Naruto. A look of awe and shock plastered all over her face as she had never seen such a large condensed blade of wind before. But before she could even contemplate her next move, several segmented pieces of carbon steel pieces connected by chains wrapped around her neck. As she reflexively brought her hands up to her neck, she tilted her to the side to see who was attacking her, and when her eyes fell upon fiery red hair and violet eyes, her own eyes widened in shock. However, before she could even say anything, the newly arrived woman growled, the only reason you're even still breathing is because I could tell you were only testing my son. Now you're going to tell me just what you were testing him for." Finally coming out of her shock, the red-haired warrior just stared at the woman behind her and stuttered, "Kushina. Uzumaki Kushina. Sorry, wrong person. My name's Fujika's Kikyo." Kushina lied. Then before May could question her about this, she decided to add a little bit of true in as well. "And last I heard, this Uzumaki Kushina died nearly 15 years ago after a incident occurred in Konoha." As the memories of that fateful event flashed before her eyes, she got a solemn expression on her face, but when she reached the end of these flashes, her spirits lifted a little. Though it is said that she took a good portion of the Uchiha clan with her when she went, including their clan head at the time, Uchiha Fugaku. Then an image of Fugaku's expression as he met his end appeared in her mind, and she couldn't help but chuckle. I guess the old saying is true after all. Not really understanding the meaning of Kushina's last words, the red-haired woman quirked her right eyebrow and asked, "And what old saying is that?" "Never come between a mother bear and her cub," replied Kushina, and as she tightened her odd weapon around the woman's throat, and once she was sure that the woman's airways were restricted enough to cause pain but do no long-lasting damage, she said, "Now why don't you answer this, Mother Bear's earlier question and tell me why you were testing my son? And let's not forget about Nei-chan," shouted Naruto as he spoke for the first time since his mother arrived. Kushina gave Naruto a sharp, menacing gaze that for all intents and purposes told Naruto that they would be having a talk later about his running off on his own before she said, "Yes, I was also going to ask her about our missing compatriot Fujika's Asagi." Quickly assessing all available options, the red-haired woman took a deep breath as she came to a decision. Turning her head as far as her neck restraint would allow her, she locked eyes with Kushina and said, "Fine. I'll tell you my reasons for testing him if you come clean about who you really are." "What are you insinuating?" asked Kushina as she tightened her grip on her weapon, ready to cut off this woman's air supply should the need arise. Keeping her eyes locked on Kushina, the woman went into her own mind and dredged up a memory from her past. "I may have only been a fresh out of the academy genin when it happened, but I remember your face. I could never forget your face, not after what happened at Mashin Pass." Kushina's eyes widened in shock, and at the mention of that place, her eyes focused more on this young woman before a memory flashed before her eyes, one of a young terrified red-haired girl bathed in blood. As she shook the memory from her mind, she muttered to herself, "Terumi Mei. I see you do remember me, Kushina-san," muttered Mei as she shook off her own memories of that fateful day that is forever burned into her memory. Seeing no point in denying it any further, Kushina let out a sigh of defeat before she said, "Yeah, I remember that day." Her posture then resumed its previous rigidity, and as she tightened her weapon, that's wrapped around Mei's neck, she softly whispered into Mei's ear, "But now that you know who I am, what's keeping me from killing you right here and now?" Thinking quickly on her feet, Mei came to a decision that she hoped would save her life. "You don't need to worry about your secret getting out, Kushina-san, because I have no intention of reporting your survival to Konoha." Mei shifted her eyes so that she was looking at the ground in disgust. "Especially not after the last meeting I had with their Hokage." Quirking an eyebrow at that last comment, Kushina very lightly eased up on the pressure she was putting on Mei's neck as she asked, "What are you jabbering about?" Realizing that it was useless to even try to talk Kushina into letting her go before she explained her situation, she let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding before she said, "Not that long ago I had a meeting with the Sandaime Hokage to try and broker a deal in which Konoha would help us overthrow the Yondaime Mizukage and his tyrannical rule against those who have Kekkei Genkai. Let me guess, he threw you out before you could even make a compelling case." Snorted Kushina as she remembered her own talks with the aged leader and the problems she and baby Naruto had faced when they lived there because of his platitudes. With a slight nod of the head to confirm Kushina's words, Mei replied, "Got it in one. Before I could even say a word, he told me that he had no intention of getting involved in our internal conflict." "That doesn't surprise me," mumbled Kushina, and after she shook her head in a mixture of disgust and irritation, she vocalized her question she had ever since Mei started this line of conversation. "But that still doesn't explain why I shouldn't kill you or why you were testing my son earlier." When she noticed that it was now or never, Mei took a deep breath before she tilted her head back so she could look at Kushina and said, "Because I want to recruit both of you into helping us deal with the Yondaime Mizukage before he instigates a massacre of the remaining Kekkei Genkai clans." Not releasing he hold on her prisoner, Kushina continued with her questioning. "And what about our compatriot? Do you know what happened to her?" Using what limited neck movement she had, Mei shook her head in a negative as she said, "Unfortunately I don't. You two are the first ones I've encountered since I left that village a few miles back. If it helps my case at all, I was on my way to Wave when I noticed your son observing me from the trees." At the mention of Wave, both Naruto and Kushina stiffened, and before Kushina could say anything, Naruto shouted, "That just proves you had something to do with Nei-chan's disappearance. She went missing when she was on her way to Wave." The harsh glare that Kushina sent at Naruto for his outburst told him all he needed to know. He crossed his arms over his chest and pursed his lips into a pout before he grumbled, Okay, okay, okay. I get it already. I'll keep quiet until you're finished. After a quick nod of approval towards her son, Kushina turned her attention back towards her captive and said, "My son does have a point. It is awfully suspicious that both of you have the same destination. Care to explain that one?" "It's simple, really," replied May as she quickly came to a fateful decision. "I've received intelligence the Momochi Zabuza and his gang is doing a job in Wave. Perhaps he's the one that's taken you, friend." "Seems unlikely," muttered Kushina as she seemed unconvinced of the possibility. "We've been aware of Zabuza's presence in Wave for some time now but have yet to hear anything about him taking prisoners. In fact, I'd find it a bit odd if he did take one given his reputation." May thought about this for a moment before she responded, "While it's true that he doesn't normally take prisoners, he might have if he's working for someone, then he may have been forced to take her as a prisoner no matter his personal feelings." Kushina seemed to ponder this for a moment before she said, "My sources do have him working for the slimy bastard Gato at the moment. So what you're saying is possible, but still, something seems off. I'm sure I would have heard something by now if Gato had Zabuza take her prisoner. Ka-san, do you think that maybe just maybe he's keeping the knowledge of Nei-chan's capture between himself and this Zabuza guy? It would explain why we haven't heard anything, wouldn't it?" interrupted Naruto, hoping that his input might help. Sensing an opportunity that she could use to her advantage, May said, "I'm sure that's what happened. So I'll tell you what, let's make a deal, Kushina." "Deal?" questioned Kushina as she arched her right eyebrow, wondering just what May had planned. "What kind of deal?" A smile spread across the captured woman's face. "It's a simple one, really. Since we're both heading to Wave, why don't we team up? I'll help you find and rescue your missing teammate. All I want in return is for you to fight with us against the Mizukage's reign of terror." When Kushina didn't outright refuse his proposal, May's smile got a little bit wider as she asked, "I take it that means you're open to the idea then?" After a few more minutes of contemplative silence, Kushina finally said, "If you help us rescue Asagi from whoever has taken her, I can guarantee that we will help you recruit Zabuza into your little rebellion, since I'm assuming that's why you're headed there in the first place." May nodded her head in acknowledgement of Kushina's assumption but still had a lingering question swimming around her head. "So what about it? Will you and your group joining our little rebellion against the Mizukage?" "That decision will have to wait until after we've rescued Asagi. I won't take any action on that front until I've had a chance to talk it over with everyone in our group that will be involved," said Kushina as she started to loosen her grip on her weapon that was wrapped around May's neck. "Deal," May quickly replied, and as the chained weapon freed her neck, she reached up and rubbed the bruises that had formed before she added, "So are you ready to head out now?" Once Kushina's chained weapon had reformed back into a staff and was strapped to her back, she said, "No, we need to head back to our campsite and gather our things before he can head out." After Kushina gave a quick nod to Naruto to indicate that he was to lead the way, the small band took to the trees. Then, as fast as any normal person would have seen, they disappeared in a swirl of dust in the wind. Coldness, dampness, a feeling of being trapped in an endless void, these were the sensations that one Fujikaze Asagi awoke to as her befuddled mind tried to figure out just what was going on. But when her mind finally cleared and she could take in her surroundings, she knew for sure that she was in deep, for no matter where she looked, all she saw was a never-ending dark abyss. The first indication that she was actually in some kind of room was when she felt something cold and metallic wrapped around her wrists. The loud clanking that ensued when she tried to move either of her arms made it pretty obvious that it was a chain and it was securely fastened to a wall that was out of reach. "Damn, this is bad, really bad," she thought to herself after taking several deep breaths to better hone her senses to figure out where she was. With her sight useless in this darkness and sound being practically non-existent, she used her sense of touch to at least get a feel as to what the ground was like. The first sensation her bare knees felt against the ground was the smooth, cool dampness of a man-made stone floor. But before she had a chance to explore her surrounding further, a bright burning light flashed directly into her face, which caused her purple hair to almost shine in the darkness. As Asagi flinched at the blinding effect of such a strong light, a big booming voice reverberated around the room. "Where's your master hiding?" When Asagi didn't immediately respond to the question, due to her still adjusting to the sudden change in lighting, the voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time boomed once more. "I'll say it again. Where is your master hiding?" Narrowing her eyes at the spotlight in front of her, since that's all she could see in the darkened room, she spat, "Go yourself." Her agonizing screams reverberated throughout the room as an electrical current ran from the chains that were attached to her wrists and coursed through her entire body. After what felt like an eternity to her, the electrical current stopped, but if one were to look close enough, one would swear that they saw smoldering smoke coming off of her skin. Asagi took several ragged breaths and did her best to ignore the searing pain pulsating from every nerve ending in her body. Then, after only a few moments of a reprieve, another jolt of electricity shot through her, and once the electrical current stopped, the voice spoke again. "As you can see, back talk will not be tolerated. So if you don't want to experience that again, tell me where your master is." Instead of answering straight away, Asagi narrowed her eyes and gave a glare of such intensity that if looks could kill, her stare would have done so. She then hurled the biggest wad of spit she could muster just to the left of the giant spotlight in front of her in the hopes of it at least hitting her tormentor. But when she heard her spit hit nothing but the solid stone floor, the punishment for such an act was given. When her screams finally died and the smoke rose from her body, the large booming voice spoke once again. "This is resistance is pointless, Anko. You know as well as I that you'll eventually break and tell us everything we want to know about your master." "Anko," replied the now identified woman as he head shot up, and for the briefest of moments a look of surprise shone in her eyes. Once that moment had passed, however, Anko put the best smirk she could on her face before she said, "Sorry, can't say I know that person. My name's Fujika's Asagi." A deep chuckle echoed throughout the room as the voice behind this interrogation had seemed to find Anko's declaration rather amusing. Then, after only a moment of silence, the voice boomed, "Do you take me for a fool? We have already had your ID confirmed as one Mitarashi Anko, current C-ranked missing nin from the village of Konoha, and apprentice to infamous S-ranked missing nin Orochimaru. Now make this easy on yourself and tell us where your master Orochimaru is hiding." Anko stared off into the darkness that was behind the spotlight, almost as if she actually could see someone back there before she got this look of disgust on her face and practically snarled, "That old yellow-eyed snake-faced bastard. Don't you think that if I knew where that slimy asshole was, I would have killed him by now?" The resounding silence in the room made it clear to Anko that whoever was questioning her hadn't expected that response. After only a few more seconds of silence, a low chuckle was heard before the booming voice said, "You're a better liar than I gave you credit for, Anko. I almost bought that, but now that I see that you're going to continue to be difficult, I guess we should move on to more effective methods." "Do your worst," snapped Anko as she glared into the darkness, just waiting for a chance to catch a glimpse of her tormentor. "It'll just make gutting you all the sweeter." The scoff that Anko heard told her clearly that whoever was behind this clearly didn't believe her. "You honestly think that you'll be able to escape and fulfill your threat?" Anko got a glint in her eye that would send a shiver down even Orochimaru's spine as she snarled, "Of course, because when they come for me." "They?" asked the voice in clear bewilderment of Anko's last statement. "Once again, you honestly think Orochimaru will send people to come and rescue you?" Her eyes narrowed dangerously at the spotlight in front of her as she hissed, "Of course not, you asshole. He'd sooner lop off his own arm than come to my aid." "They, on the other hand." A sudden hissing noise filled the blackened room. Anko snapped her head left and right in an effort to locate what was creating the noise. Then, when her eyes fell upon the gaseous cloud that rose in front of the spotlight, she let out a gasp as she realized what was going on. As she held her breath in an effort to prolong whatever effects the gas would have on her, she heard the booming voice one last time. "Since we don't seem to be getting anywhere with our current method, I think it's time we move on to our more advanced methods." But after several moments of since the voice seemed to realize Anko was holding her breath in response to the plight the gas filling the room represented, so it added, "Oh, in order to move you to your new accommodations, we've filled the room with a simple knockout gas. We wouldn't want you to get any idea while in transport now, would we?" Anko could swear that she heard the voice chuckle at his own choice of words, but as seconds started to turn to minutes, she found she cared less and less about the reverberating chuckles. Then, after what felt like hours, the person behind the voice decided they'd had enough of Anko's resistance and sent several jolts of electricity through her body. She held it in for as long as she could, but eventually the pain became too much and she screamed out in agony. With the knockout gas filling her lungs and her consciousness slowly leaving her, only one thought continued to run around in her head, giving her a sense of hope that she would need to survive her future ordeals. "They will come for me, they will come." The cool, crisp midnight air sent a shiver down the kunoichi's spine as she leapt from tree branch to tree branch. She was well aware of the fact that the light of the full moon was the only thing illuminating her path through the darkened forest, and that right now was the perfect time for her to walk into an ambush. When she landed on the next branch on her path out, she took a couple of moments to catch her breath and as a precaution scan the area for any signs of her pursuers. Her eyes darted left, then right, peering through the darkness for anything out of the ordinary that would alert her to any danger present. Upon finding none, she plopped down on the branch and wiped the sweat from her brow while pondering her next move. It had been 12 hours since she had fled, and she was sure that if she didn't have some kind of plan in place for dealing with her pursuers, then this little bid for freedom would have been for nothing. But before she could even come up with a single idea to secure her freedom, her highly tuned senses went haywire, alerting her that the ones after her were closing in, and if she wanted to stay one step ahead, she needed to leave right now. Getting to her feet in an instant, she jumped off the branch, her green hair shimmering in the moonlight, and as her orange eyes continued to scan the area in case they managed to get ahead of her, she wondered if there would ever be a time where she wouldn't have to fear for her life. Her name was Fu, and she was the Jinchuriki of the Shichibi. From a branch overlooking a hastily created makeshift campsite, Naruto stifled a yawn as the first rays of sunshine hit his face. He always did find watch duty boring, but this time it was especially so since they were so close to Wave, and this is where his sister in all but blood had gone missing. Finally, having enough of just sitting around doing nothing, he jumped down off the branch with every intention of waking up the other two members of this little group. But just as his feet touched the ground, his highly trained senses detected movement of an unknown person about 100 to 200 yards south of them in the thickest foliage of the forest. Deciding to take the bull by the horns, so to speak, and make sure that this person wasn't any kind of threat, Naruto took to the trees once again and headed off in the direction of the detected movement. But just as he had gotten to the edge of the campsite, a small shiver ran down his spine as he remembered the tongue-lashing Kushina had given him about taking off on his own. So to avoid getting on his mother's bad side again, he made a clone to inform her of what he was up to. Once he reached his intended destination, Naruto carefully took note of the area. The thick foliage and tree roots that seemed to just burst from the ground was indeed an excellent spot to hide, or in a worst-case scenario lay in wait for some unsuspecting victim to come along. That particular scenario was something he wanted to avoid at all costs. Slowly and with as much stealth as this unforgiving area would allow, he waded his way through the brush, making his way to where all of his senses were telling him this unknown person was. But when he turned his attention back to her, he was surprised to see that she returned that contempt tenfold. "You've been waiting for this moment for a long time, hasn't you, you bastard?" When a slight smirk was the leader's only response, Naruto suddenly felt a huge charka surge come from Fu before she shouted, "Well then, if you think you got the balls for it, bring it. I don't even care if you all attack at once. I'll take you all on." As Fu charged her attackers, Naruto had seen enough and was about to go and help the green-haired girl when an arm suddenly grabbed his shoulder, preventing him from joining the fight. He immediately spun around to confront this assailant, only to be stopped in his tracks when he saw his mother, Uzumaki Kushina, standing there. But before he could react to this in any way, she brought her index finger up to his lips as she mouthed, not yet. Just then a huge charka spike unlike anything Naruto had experienced before permeated the area, and as he looked back towards Fu he saw that she was enveloped in a golden chakra that wiped and whirled around her in an angry and violent manner. Then to his great surprise the golden chakra that was irradiating off of Fu's back molded itself into insect-like wings. Naruto's jaw dropped as he recognized this telltale sign immediately, and he knew right then and there just what Fu really was. She's just like me, Naruto muttered to himself as he stood there transfixed on the scene in front of him. Unfortunately Fu's impressive display was short-lived when the leader of the assault squad, assigned to retrieve their wayward Jinchuriki, channeled his chakra and made a single hand seal. This time it was Kushina who narrowed her eyes in suspicion when she saw Fu clutch her right bicep, exactly where her forehead protector was located, as if she was experiencing extreme pain. Then, much to Naruto and Kushina's surprise, the huge charka shroud that had enveloped Fu just a few seconds before receded back into her body, and once it was completely contained back within its seal she collapsed to the ground as if she was suddenly exhausted. Suspicion ran rampant in Kushina's mind as to what just happened to the Jinchuriki. She had a few ideas, but without any solid evidence no conclusions could be made. So when she saw the leader approach Fu she focused on the conversation that was about to take place. Did you honestly think we would let you run around without some kind of leash? The leader sneered as he motioned for his men to bind the weakened Fu, and once she was safely secured he leaned in further and said, "Now our superiors want to know. Why did you flee the village?" Even bound Fu's spirit refused to be broken, which was reflected in her eyes and the look of defiance that never left her face as she snarled, "Piss off." The leader, tired of her backtalk, quickly backhanded her across the face. "Stop wasting our time, and just tell us why you abandoned the village that raised and fed you." After she spat the blood out of her mouth she glared at her attacker and growled out a question of her own. "Why stay loyal to a village that isn't loyal to me?" The second backhand that Fu received for her mouth pushed Naruto's patience to the breaking point, but just before he was about to do something to help his fellow Jinchuriki, Kushina tightened her grip on his shoulder and signaled that he needed to wait for just a bit more. He let out a quiet sigh of aggravation before he turned his attention back towards Fu. "Isn't loyal to you?" snarled the leader as he grabbed her by the throat and slowly began to squeeze. "And what, pray tell, ever gave you that idea?" The sudden lack of oxygen due to the hand wrapped around her throat made her gasp and struggle for air, but her defiance never left her eyes as she managed to choke out, I know how you plan to deal with the Akatsuki." Those words shocked the leader so much that he released his grip, and as Fu took several gulps of air he looked down at her in disbelief and asked, "What did you say?" After she got her breathing under control, Fu lifted her head and glared at the man with all of the hatred one would have for a deep betrayal before she spat, "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? You profess about loyalty to the village, yet it was that very village that planned to just hand me over to those bastards in order to save their own." Kushina's head snapped up as a sudden idea on how to deal with this situation popped into her mind. Working quickly she pulled out a scroll she had on her and smeared some blood on the seal, which caused its content to be called forth. When Naruto received half of the contents which his mother had unsealed, he looked at her with a cocked eyebrow as if to silently ask, "Really, you keep these on you at all times?" After a sheepish shrug of the shoulders from his mother in response to the unspoken question, he looked back at the black cloak with red clouds on it and a smile formed on his face as he immediately knew what Kushina had planned. Once the cloak was on and the straw hat was on top of his head, Naruto pulled the black mask that was draped around his neck up so that he would cover his whisker-like birthmarks. With his identity completely concealed, he turned towards his mother and saw that she too was ready to enact her plan. Meanwhile, the leader of the group that was assigned to capture Fu recovered from his initial shock of her words before a snarl spread across his lips. "So you managed to find that out, did you? Well, I guess that means you leave me no other choice." But before Fu could even formulate a response, Kushina, dressed in her black cloak with red clouds, appeared right behind the leader and plunged a kunai straight into his heart, killing him instantly. While at that very same moment Naruto appeared right behind the shinobi that was closest to Fu and cleanly snapped the man's neck. Deciding to sell the deception even further, Kushina didn't wait for any kind of reaction from the survivors before she seemingly vanished before the retrieval team's eyes, then within the blink of an eye she reappeared behind the closest member. She then delivered a devastating blow to the man's throat, crushing the man's windpipe. As the man crumpled to the ground gasping his last breath, she returned to her original spot before she said, "The Jinchuriki is ours, interference will not be tolerated." The man's words died in his mouth as a kunai slashed across his throat. As the man slumped down to the ground choking on his own blood, a shuriken pierced the forehead of the last remaining survivor of the capture team. Once that man's lifeless body hit the ground, Naruto walked over to him and removed the shuriken from the corpse. As he put the shuriken back into his holster, his actions caught up with him and he got a remorseful look on his face. "Ka-san, do you think there will ever be a time where we won't have to live by the motto, leave no witnesses?" A hint of sadness was reflected in Kushina's eyes as she mentally cursed fate for forcing her son to grow up so fast and have to kill in order to remain under the radar so that he can survive. After several moments of reflective silence, she could only mutter her response, "I hope so, Naruto-kun, I truly hope so." Taking quick stock of everything that needed to be done in order to cover their tracks, Kushina turned towards her son. "Naruto-kun, why don't you go look after our guest? I'll clean up here." "You sure, Ka-san?" asked Naruto as he surveyed all the bodies and knew just how much work would go into cleaning up this mess. A soft smile graced her lips at her son's concern before she gave a half-hearted wave of dismissal with her hand as she said, "I'm sure. Now go and see to the damsel we just saved, will you?" With a silent nod of agreement, Naruto turned and headed towards the bound and captured Fu. When he was finally next to Fu, she tightened her muscles in preparation for her resistance, and with a defiant look on her face she snarled, "If you think you've got it easy just because I'm already bound, you better think again, Buster." "Whoa, ease up there. I'm not your enemy," Naruto said as he put his hands up in an unthreatening manner, all the while moving very slowly towards her. Seeing the look of disbelief upon her face, he decided to go for broke. "Besides, why would I want to harm one of my own kinds?" "Your own kind?" questioned Fu as her right eyebrow rose in obvious confusion and wonder. A fox-like smile spread across his face as he jabbed his thumb into his chest while at the same time used his other hand to remove his mask to reveal his whisker-like birthmarks. "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, Jinchuriki of Kyuubi no Yoko, and just all-around badass." "Nar," Kushina started to shout before she quickly corrected herself, "Menma." Naruto cringed at the harsh tone in his mother's voice and immediately understood what she was implying. He gave a heavy sigh of resignation before he looked at Fu and in a much more muted tone said, "But you can call me Fujika's Menma, or if you want you can use my codename Fox." "Your codename is Fox? Why would you need a codename when it's already apparent that you're using a fake one?" questioned Fu as her anger at being betrayed by her own village was quickly being replaced by her curiosity for this strange, apparent Jinchuriki and his female partner. Scratching the back of his head in a moment of embarrassed uncertainty, Naruto got a cheesy grin on his face as he tried to change the subject. Let's talk about that later. First, I want to take a look and see just what they used on you to subdue you so easily." Instinctively twisting her body so that her right arm was away from Naruto, her face changed to one of suspicion and anger. "You think I'm going to let you learn how to hurt me too?" Naruto arched his left eyebrow in confusion at her sudden outburst before he said, "Didn't I just tell you that I wouldn't hurt my own kind?" A small blush of embarrassment appeared upon Fu's cheeks for letting her instinctual fear of being hurt override her actions. But when her eyes fell upon the red-headed teammate of Naruto, they hardened. "What about her? How do I know she wouldn't use it to try and cause me pain?" A small chuckle escaped Naruto's lips at the mere thought of his mother even contemplating harming another Jinchuriki out of spite. After taking a few moments to collect himself, he knelt down right next to her and said, I really doubt my Ka-san wants to cause you pain, Fu-chan. After all, she is the former Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yoko. Fu's jaw dropped at this statement, and as she turned her gaze back towards Kushina, she stuttered, "Why, you mean we can survive having them taken out of us?" "No," snapped Naruto before he looked over at his mother, and with a solemn expression on his face he said, "She still refuses to talk about it, but from what I've been able to figure out, her Uzumaki blood kept her from instantly dying when Kyuubi was extracted. Don't get me wrong, she was still dying from the damage the extraction caused. Best I can figure is something happened that prevented her from dying, something that caused someone else to sacrifice themselves so she could survive." So caught up in her own disbelief, Fu muttered just what was on her mind. Who would do that for a Jinchuriki? "Don't know," responded Naruto as his gaze softened, "but it must have been someone who was important to her." After a few moments of silence between the two, Fu offered no further resistance as Naruto took off her forehead protector, which was wrapped around her right bicep, and began to look at the seal that lay underneath. His eyes widened in shock at what he saw. He snapped his head around towards the direction of his mother and shouted, "Ka-san. You need to take a look at this right now." In the blink of an eye, Kushina was at Naruto's side examining the seal. Her eyes narrowed in anger as she recognized the seal. No matter how crude or amateurish it was done, there was no doubt in her mind that this was an Uzumaki seal. "When I get my hands on whoever placed this on you, I'm going to," seethed Kushina as her anger was so intense that it seemed to bring her hair to life as it slithered and wiggled like that of a snake. This and the fact she was radiating killing intent actually frightening the two Jinchuriki. Overcoming her fear of the red-haired woman, Fu swallowed a lump in her throat and asked, "So what does this seal do? I always thought it was just supposed to immobilize me with pain until they could capture me." Kushina took several moments to rein her temper in before she answered Fu's question. "No, it was never meant to immobilize, it was meant for a far more sinister purpose. This seal originated from the Uzumaki's torture and interrogation division. It was designed to activate every single pain receptor in the human body, and keep them active until the goal of the interrogator was achieved. Imagine every single nerve ending on fire, causing you unimaginable pain while at the same time preventing the brain from shutting down until the subject was broken. But then why didn't they just use it to make her their little puppet?" asked Naruto. "Simple really, the seal is imperfect," Kushina replied as she turned Fu's arm slightly to get a better look at the seal. It was a simple square-shaped design with the kanji for pain, torture, suffering and truth along the Uzumaki spiral painted within. After letting everyone get a good look at the seal, she pointed to a particularly smudged and distorted part before she said, "See here, the control for shutting down the seal when the subject is broken isn't working. If they had just left it active, Fu here would have eventually gone insane and become a liability for them." A shiver ran down Fu's spine at the thought of being tortured until she lost her mind and had become nothing more than a beast. She then looked up at Kushina with a bit of apprehension and fear in her eyes as she asked her next question. Can it be removed?" Kushina looked down at the female Jinchuriki and let a smile cross her lips. "Well, the ink is of the lowest quality, the workmanship is sloppy and obviously done by an amateur. So I should be able to remove it in no time." As she reached into her pouch to retrieve the needed materials, her head suddenly shot up as if she had just remembered something. She quickly turned to Naruto and said, "When we get back to Camp 1, want you to contact the others. Tell them that as of now we will actively and covertly disrupt any tacky missions we come across. I want their shinobi to look inept and useless, understood?" "Clearly, Ka-san," said Naruto as a predatory smile spread across his lips in anticipation of just what they were going to do to bring Taki to its knees in retaliation for what they did to a fellow Jinchuriki. Fu looked from mother to son a couple of times before she asked, "Others? Do you have other Jinchuriki with you?" "Sadly no, you're the first Jinchuriki that we've come across," replied Naruto before he glanced at his mother with a silent plea in his eyes. After a discreet nod from her, he got a big grin on his face and turned his attention back towards Fu. "But we are part of a group of Misfits that have banded together under the leadership of my Ka-san here. At the mention of a group, renewed fears of these two just going to use and toss her away when they were done with her flooded her mind, but before she could even verbalize her feelings, Naruto seemed to sense what she was thinking. We aren't going to use you. Our group is made up of people who have been abandoned by normal society. Ka-san banded us together so that we could protect ourselves and survive in this world, said Naruto as he did his best to reassure Fu that they meant her no harm. Seeing that she was seriously thinking over what he had just told her, Naruto saw an opportunity here and decided to take a chance. After another discreet nod from his mother, Naruto couldn't help but let his foxy grin return in full force. If you want, you can join us. You know what they say, strength in numbers and all. Fu was shocked. Never in her life had she ever been given such an open gesture of kindness. Here these people just showed up out of nowhere and helped save her from her captors as well as freed her from a vile seal that could have driven her insane, and to top it all off, they clearly didn't want anything in return. In fact, Fu was starting to suspect that the only reason they told her about this group of theirs was because she asked. With all these facts swirling around her head, one thought kept popping up: what do I really have to lose? After what felt like an eternity for her but was in fact only a few seconds, she came to a decision, and after she made up her mind, she couldn't help but realize that in the end she really didn't have any other choice. With a faint smile on her face, she said, "Sure, I'll join your little group. It does seem to be my best chance at survival after all." "They're finished," interrupted Kushina as she put the last of her tools away before she turned back towards Fu, and with a huge grin on her face she pumped her fist in the air and said, "Even though it was in such piss-poor condition, I managed to remove it without any problems. Damn, I'm good." The two of them looked at Kushina for a moment, Naruto with a knowing smile as he shook his head, and Fu with a look that questioned if she made the right choice. After reaffirming her decision that she would rather have these two with her than against her, she turned back towards Naruto before she muttered, "As I was saying, I think it would be in my best interests to join your group." "Yahoo!" shouted Naruto as he pumped his fist into the air. "We've got a new member." Once his little outburst was over, he stuck out his hands and said, "Welcome to the Marauders." A faint smile formed on Fu's face, and as shook his hand, a warm feeling spread throughout her body at being so openly welcomed by these two. It was a new experience for her for sure, and it was something that she felt she could get used to. Her internal reflection on these new feelings was short-lived, however, as Kushina brought both her and Naruto back to reality. "All right, you two, we can celebrate later. Right now we need to get back to camp and get our other traveling companion, so we can get to Wave as soon as possible." Naruto's happy expression suddenly turned to a serious one, and as he took to the trees he said, "Right, we don't have a moment to lose." Curious as to what caused this sudden shift in Naruto, she quickly caught up to him. "What's going on? Why are we in such a rush to get to Wave?" Without even turning to look at her, he replied, "A member of our group is missing. She was supposed to meet with a contact we have in Wave, but she never showed." Naruto let out a deep sigh before he continued, "We're hoping to find some clue as to where she is once we get there." "What makes you think she even made it to Wave? I mean, she could have been attacked anywhere from where you last saw here in Wave." Naruto remained silent, contemplating just how much he should tell her, but just as the group landed in the clearing on the outskirts of their campsite, Kushina decided to answer. "We know she was in Wave because she sent us a message that she had just crossed its borders, and was going to go meet our contact." Before Fu could even formulate her next question, she noticed another red-haired woman leaning up against a tree. "And would you mind telling me just where have you two been?" "Just dealing with a disturbance not far from our campsite," replied Kushina in an authoritative tone. She didn't like how Mei seemed to want to be in complete control of the group even though they had never agreed to serve under her. In a play to show she was the one in charge of the others and not Mei, she stepped out in front and stared Mei down. Mei quirked an eyebrow at the comment, clearly not liking that she was being kept in the dark, before she looked to Kushina's left at spotted Fu. "A disturbance? Somehow I think there's more to it than that. Oh. Kushina tilted her head a little to the right as that statement, clearly wanting to know what she was on about. And what make you say that? Crossing her arms over her chest, May got a look of annoyance over her face as she huffed. Oh, I don't know, could have something to do with the fact that you and your son took out a squad of hunters back there. What's your point? My point, May huffed as she pushed herself off of the tree trunk she was leaning against, is that you're wasting time dealing with these disturbances instead of focusing on our agreement. I haven't forgotten about our agreement, snapped Kushina as she got right up into May's face and poked her in the chest before she added, and let me just make this perfectly clear right now. I don't like it when someone wants to control my actions. I got enough of that when I lived in Konoha, and I'll be damned if I left it happen again. Is that understood? I understand perfectly. May all but snarled as she could understand where Kushina was coming from, but didn't like the attitude the red-haired Kunoichi had used to get her point across, but her angry thoughts were soon shoved to the side as she noticed the green-haired girl that was standing beside Naruto, a girl that Mai knew wasn't there before all this happened. Who's the girl? Kushina glanced over her shoulder at their newest member and gave her a reassuring smile. Her name's Fu and she's our new recruit. New recruit? Questioned May. Recruit for what? Don't tell me you're picking up strays. Perhaps I should test her skills so that I know she won't be a burden on the mission at hand. Incensed at what May was implying about Fu, she decided to give this woman a piece of her mind. Kushina got back into May's face and growled, don't even think about it, May. It's not your place to question my decisions. Never forget that we aren't your underlings. We've only agreed to help you in Wave because it's mutually beneficial. As I've said before, anything after that has yet to be determined. Having said her piece, Kushina took a step back and let out a calming breath before she said, now if you still want our help, I suggest we both put this behind us, and start acting like the professionals we are. A curt nod from May showed that she agreed to put aside their differences and work together for the mission ahead. With the tension that permeated the area just a few moments ago sufficiently broken for now, May took this opportunity to try and repair the damage that she now realizes she caused. Yes, you're right, Kushina. It's not my place to question what you do with your group. It's just that this mission is really important for the future of my village and I got carried away. Kushina just waved her off. As long as you don't do it again, it's water under the bridge, as they say. So why don't we get going? If we move quickly, we should make it to Wave before the end of the day. With a quick nod of agreement, May went off to gather her equipment with Kushina right behind her. Once those two were gone, Fu turned towards Naruto and said, man, your mother can be scary sometimes, you know that. Oh, you have no idea, Fu-chan. Funny thing is, you haven't even seen her truly mad yet, now that is when she gets scary. Replied Naruto as he motioned her to follow. Come on, if we don't hurry we'll be left behind and we don't want that, now do we? Right. Relied Fu before both of them took off to help pack up the campsite. A short time later the campsite was packed up and all traces of them even being there were sealed away. Shoving the last of the sealing scrolls into her pouch, Kushina turned towards May, Naruto, and Fu and said, alright, let's move out. If we move at top speed we should be able to reach Wave by nightfall. Then what are we waiting for? Nei-chan need us, shouted Naruto as he stowed away the last of his sealing scrolls. Fu turned towards Naruto and asked, she must be carrying some really important information for you to be this concerned. It's not that, he replied as he met Fu's gaze. She's family. Seeing the perplexed look on Fu's face, Kushina placed a hand on her shoulder as she said, Fu, now that you're part of this group, you're going to learn that we see each other as family. And our number one rule is family always comes first. So that means that if you have to choose the completion of your mission or saving your family, you save your family. Understand? Fu could only nod dumbly as the implications of Kushina's words sunk into her brain. With a gentle smile on her face, Kushina patted Fu's shoulder one last time. Never forget that we're your family now and we'll always be there for you. As Kushina signaled the rest of the group to move out, Fu's lips curled into a smile of their own as she muttered to herself. Family. I think I could get used to that. Damn it. Naruto screamed as he slammed his fist into a nearby tree, cracking the bark from the amount of force he used. His current anger and frustration are related to the fact that he had just met with their contact in Wave, and they have informed him that they have yet to find anything new about the whereabouts of Anko. He continued to slam his fist into the bark of the tree until his knuckles began to bleed in a desperate attempt to alleviate his frustration. His actions, however, attracted the attention of someone else in the area. You know, if you weren't a Jinchuriki, you'd be liable to break your hand if you kept that up. Very funny, Fu-chan. Naruto retorted in a tone that showed he was annoyed but not angry with her. But this is just so frustrating. I mean, my sister is out there somewhere suffering who knows what, and I can't do anything about it. I feel so powerless. Fu remained silent for several minutes, pondering over what she had just heard. If that is what it means to be a family, I'm not sure I want that. Naruto snapped his head around to face her, shock clearly evident on his face. You can't mean that. What would ever possess you to think like that, Fu-chan? Naruto asked, as he was obviously couldn't understand how she could even think that. You said it yourself, Naruto. Fu replied with a hint of surprise in her voice. You feel helpless and powerless. Those are some of the worst feelings you could have, and if having a family only intensifies this, then it must be a weakness, and I don't want any part of that. It's not a weakness, Fu-chan. True, I feel powerless right now, but that's only because we've been unable to do anything to help Anko. If anything, these feelings force me to try even harder to find her and make sure she's alright. Trust me, Fu-chan, once you've started to form some of these bonds, you'll understand. I don't know. Naruto walked over towards Fu and put his hand on her shoulder in an effort to reassure her. You've been on your own your whole life, right? At her subtle nod, he gave her shoulder a soft pat. It's going to take time, but when you have those bonds as well, you're not going to want to let them go. If you say so, Naruto, but I'm not so sure, said Fu, still not completely convinced that what Naruto said was true. Give it time, Fu-chan, give it time. This little moment was cut short, however, when Naruto's senses picked up movement heading their way. He quickly tapped Fu on the shoulder and silently motioned for her to follow him. They had just made it into a heavy foliated tree when a young girl in their mid to late teens walked out of the forest. She had long blonde hair tied into a high ponytail, with the bangs on her right side being long enough so that only her left eye was visible, and wore a two-piece purple dress. She seemed to look around for a few seconds before her eyes fell upon a plant that was growing beside a large oak tree. For the next several minutes, the pair watched the blonde-haired girl gather different types of plants and flowers. Naruto had thought of approaching her at one point but stopped when she reached for a kunai as a rabbit rustled through the underbrush near her. This was a clear sign to both Naruto and Fu that this girl was more than what she seemed. Once the blonde-haired girl had gathered enough of the plants she was looking for, she stood up and left the same way she came. When she was finally out of sight, the pair of Jinchuriki came out of hiding. Fu focused her gaze in the direction that the girl had gone and said, I wonder who that was. From the way she moved and the weapon she pulled, you could tell she wasn't just an ordinary civilian but a shinobi. Naruto just shrugged his shoulders in response. Don't know, but it's clear she's not from around here. I wonder where she came from. She's from Konoha, Kushina suddenly said as she and Mei appeared beside the pair of Jinchuriki. How can you be so sure? Asked Naruto as he tried to recall anything from his observations that would hint at her being from such a place. Kushina let out a sigh of resignation before she got a very serious look on her face. I saw the rest of her group while we were in town. From the looks of it, I'd say she's from the Yamanaka clan. It's a well-known clan from the village of Konoha. Her clan specializes in the mental arts, and is an expert at extracting information from their subject. They even have ninjutsu that will allow them to enter your mind and take over your body. So that makes her dangerous if she has the skill and cunning to get you into a position that gives her the chance to use her clan techniques. Wonder what they're doing here. I don't know and quite frankly don't care. All I know is that I don't want you to have anything to do with anyone that comes from Konoha. Snapped Kushina as her fear of being so close to those shinobi became evident by the tone in her voice. You know I told you what they're like. They act all friendly towards your face while plotting behind your back. They can't be trusted. But, no buts Naruto-kun. Kushina interrupted him again. If Konoha ever found out you were alive, the Sandaime would stop at nothing, and I mean nothing, to get you back. It wouldn't surprise me one bit that if he got desperate enough he'd send his entire shinobi force to capture you. Naruto was about to retort about how that wouldn't seem likely when his mother placed her hand on his shoulder. I don't ever want to lose you. I can't lose you, Naruto-kun. I can't. Ka-san, Naruto mumbled in response as he lowered his head in shame now that he realized just what his mother was trying to tell him. You'll never have to worry about that. That's a promise. Naruto got a mischievous gleam in his eye as an idea popped into his head. Still, it would be a good idea to try and get some information out of them. His mother's eye hardened at this news. Didn't we just go over this? I thought I just told you that I'd be just fine if we never had to see them again. True. He said, and before his mother could utter another word of further protest he added, but why don't we use this to our advantage? Kushina looked at her son in curiosity and voiced her thoughts. What are you on about, Naruto-kun? Naruto got a smirk on his face as he said, I'm talking about using this Ino to see if this group from Konoha knows anything about Nei-chan. A look of pure terror crossed Kushina's face at the mere thought that Anko had actually been captured by Konoha, a thought that for some reason had never crossed her mind. Before her eyes darkened, I swear if Konoha does have her. The amount of ki that Kushina released at that thought was enough to even cause Mei to gasp. Fortunately for all those present, it vanished just as quickly as it appeared, for Kushina has learned to rein in her emotions very quickly. After a deep calming breath, Kushina realized that Naruto had a point, so she looked at him with a look of resignation before she said, Alright Naru-kun, you can make contact with this Ino person to see if they have any information on Anko-chan, but don't expect too much, she is an expert in the mind arts after all. You got it, Ka-san. Naruto said as he gave his mother a playful salute. Just be careful, okay? Under no circumstances do I want this Konoha shinobi to learn who you really are, understood? After Naruto's quick nod of agreement, Fu stepped forward to offer her services. I'll back him up. When the two of them turned to face her, she added, What? He's going to need backup in case this Ino person catches on to our true intentions. She then got a sheepish look on her face, embarrassed that they were calling her out on something that was still new and foreign to her. After all, we look out for each other, right? That right, Fu-chan? We're always there for each other, replied Naruto as he let a smile grace his lips at finally feeling like he's doing something useful and constructive in the search for his sister. Now he only hoped that this little endeavor didn't turn out to be a giant waste of time. XXXXXXX. As the morning sun rose over the horizon, Fu and Naruto were already up, and on their way to the small town his mother had scouted the day before. When they reached the outskirts of the city, Fu turned to her companion. So, just how are we going to pull this off anyway? I hadn't really thought that far ahead actually. Naruto sheepishly replied while he rubbed the back of his head with his right hand. What? Shouted Fu as she stared at him in disbelief. You mean to tell me that we embarked on this mission without any kind of plan? Is this how you do things? Well, what about you? Naruto shot back, clearly irritated at her outburst and lack of faith she was showing. Did you come up with anything? Fu was flabbergasted. Never in her entire experience as a shinobi had she ever been asked that before. No, she replied before she lowered her head, her cheeks flushed in embarrassment. I've never been allowed to come up with plans before. In fact, it was discouraged. So it never crossed my mind. You've got to be kidding me, shouted Naruto in disbelief as he stared at Fu wide-eyed. What happened when you were on your own? The female Jinchuriki started to rub the back of her own head as she nervously chuckled. Well, I just usually charged in and overpowered my opponents. Ah! Naruto groaned as he shook his head in his right hand. One of the first things his mother had drilled into his head was to never just charge in blindly, because you never know just what your target could have up their sleeve. Well, we're going to have to work on that. Can't have you rushing off blindly now, can we? Hypocrite. Hey, I'll have you know that when it comes to battles, I'm known for my quick thinking and unpredictable moves. Naruto shot back. Besides, this isn't a battle situation. So what say we just observe for now and see where it leads? After a quick nod of acknowledgement from Fu, the two continued into the town in search of their quarry. A short time later, they located their target coming out of what looked like a rundown grocery store with a black-haired woman who appeared to be in her early 30s. They continued to watch the pair of females over the next couple of hours as they went from shop to shop, gathering what Naruto guessed was what they needed to survive in this impoverished nation. He felt a pang of sympathy for this place as he saw more and more of just what Gato had done for the sake of gathering more power for himself. This feeling grew even more when out of the corner of his eye he noticed a couple of Gato's thugs terrorizing a local shop vendor that their targets were heading for next. It was a quaint little shop that looked like it sold local herds and medics even if the man's shelves were almost bare. Naruto let out a sigh of resignation at just how bad it was here before he turned towards his companion only to find that she wasn't there. Fu-chan, Naruto muttered to himself as he shook his head in frustration because he knew exactly where she had gone. XXXXXXX. Please, I'll get you the money. I just need a few more days. The shop owner pleaded as he dropped to his knees before one of the thugs that were currently harassing him. The goon sneered at the owner right as he knocked over one of the tables next to him, spilling what little product the shop did have all over the floor. Too late, old man, your payment is due today. You wouldn't want us to do anything unsavory now, would you? Now where is the money? The goon then placed his hand on the hilt of his sword and stared down at the man with an expectant look. The shopkeeper looked up at the man with desperation in his eyes as he said, "Business had been slow. You'll have your money, I just need a little more time is all." Wrong answer. The goon replied as he pulled his sword from his sheath, but before he could strike the store owner, a hand grabbed his wrist and hurled him across the shop. As the man slammed up against the far wall, Fu turned towards the other thug and snarled, "You guys think you're so tough picking on someone who's weaker than you. I hate people like you. People like you were the reason why my childhood was a living hell." Without waiting for a response, Fu charged forward. Her shinobi training became apparent when, before the other thug had a chance to react, Fu appeared right in front of him and sucker punched him in the chin, knocking the man to the ground. Not giving him a chance to recover, Fu jumped on top of him and began to repeatedly slam her fists into his face, her anger for what was done to her over the years finally boiling to the surface. "You think you're so tough picking on those who can't fight back, huh? How do you like it now that you're the ones getting your kicked?" She continued to bash his face, ignoring the gurgled blood-filled pleas of the man, desperately begging for her to stop. It would seem that the rage she had bottled up over the years had emerged and wasn't sated so easily. "Do you like it? Is the pain excruciating? Are you wishing for it to stop, or maybe you'd like me to just kill you so the pain will go away? Well, guess what? That's how I felt during my entire childhood. And you've only been given a taste of what this kind of pain has done to me." Just as her fist was about to smash into his face again, a hand grabbed her wrist. "That's enough, Fu-chan." She turned to see Naruto just standing there staring down at her with a stern expression before it softened a bit. "I understand how you feel, believe me I do. But this is only proving them right. What do you know?" Fu snapped as she jerked her arm free of Naruto's grip before she pointed at the unconscious and badly bleeding man. In fact, she had pummeled him so bad that his face was almost unrecognizable. "You have a mother. Someone that cares and loves you. All I've ever had were humans like this, always looking down on me. Always hurting and starving me. So don't tell me you understand." A tense silence fell between the two, and before Fu knew what was going on, Naruto did the only thing he's ever known to do when someone becomes this emotional: he enveloped her into a hug. Shocked and terrified by this sudden action, she began to struggle against the embrace. Let go of me. Let go. Fu growls as her increased struggles only caused Naruto to tighten his embrace, trying his best to convey a sense of understanding and comfort. You're wrong, you know, he whispered into her ear after several long moments. I may have had my mother, but I know full well the kind of suffering you went through, what I went through. Fu noticed his darker tone there at the end, a tone she knows all too well, a tone that spoke from experience. She stopped struggling in his grip and looked up at him with curiosity shining in her eyes. What did they do to you? Naruto tensed for a moment as memories of that time came flooding back to him. He heard his own screams echoing inside his head as phantom pains shot through his body, before he forcibly shoved those memories and emotions back into the recesses of his mind. Let's just say that I learned the hard way what others will sink to when they learn of our status. And your mother just let that happen. Fu all but growled at the thought. It was only the second time in my life that she wasn't there, and she's never forgiven herself for that, replied Naruto, as even after all these years he found it impossible to talk about what actually happened to him. The two just stood there in silence, each uncertain of what to say next, when both of them hear someone clear their throat. As the pair turned towards the noise, they saw the dark-haired woman that had been their target earlier approach. She must have approached them as they were arguing. Excuse me. The young woman hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. Is she going to be all right now? She seemed a little upset there. What are you doing, Tsunami-san? Shouted their blonde-haired target as she positioned herself between the now identified Tsunami and Naruto. Her right hand hovered above her kunai pouch as she eyed the two warily. You saw what that green-hair tomboy did to those two thugs. What's to stop her from doing that to you? Tomboy. I'll show you a tomboy. Fu growled as she freed herself from Naruto's grasp and started to stalk her way over to this newcomer, only for Naruto to grab her shoulder. Not now, Fu-chan. Naruto said in a stern tone that left no room for question. But, I said not now. Naruto snapped as he gave her a piercing stare that left no room for argument. Fine. Fu shouted as she jerked her shoulder free and stormed over to the nearby wall, where she leaned up against it before she crossed her arms over her chest. With that dealt with, Naruto turned back towards the blonde female that still had her hand right above her kunai pouch, ready to pull one at a moment's notice. Are we going to talk or fight? Naruto's abrupt question caught the blonde off guard. Talk? Just what would we talk about? How about this? Naruto said as he whipped out a photo of him and Anko from his last birthday party. It was a picture from a happier time where she was ruffling his hair while giving the victory sign to the camera. Have you seen this person? He watched the blonde-haired girl's reaction closely, hoping that the shock of seeing the person in the photo would be enough to give him a hint as to whether or not she knew something about his sister. When he didn't see anything other than the expected reactions of confusion and curiosity, he used every ounce of willpower he had not to scream in frustration. After several moments of studying the picture, the blonde looked up from the picture. Can't say that I have. Who is she anyway? My sister. Naruto replied, seeing no harm in giving that much away before he looked down at the picture with a longing he rarely showed. She came here for a job but disappeared shortly after arriving. We've been looking for her ever since. Tsunami realized what her disappearance probably meant and steeled her face as she prepared to give him the bad news. I'm sorry to tell you this, but if she disappeared around here, it means that Gatos has taken her. After a moment of silence, Tsunami, an idea popped into her head. She clasped her hands together as a look of joy crossed her face. Hey, why don't you ask Ino-san here to check the minds of those two thugs? I'm told she's quite good at that, and I'm sure she could find out where your sister is. Tsunami. What Ino-san? Tsunami asked, clearly confused by Ino's angry outburst. Don't you want to help? Tsunami then turned to Naruto and got a sheepish look on her face. Menma. Naruto replied to the unasked question. Tsunami gave Naruto a grateful smile before she continued, don't you want to help Menma-san here find his sister? Of course I'd want to help. Ino huffed as she placed her hands on her hips. But that doesn't give you the right to just blab about me. Blab. Yes. Ino all but yelled, you can't just go telling people about my skills. You never know who may be listening. Aside from the two that are knocked out, we're the only ones here. Even the owner took off once Fu-chan showed up. So I don't see a problem. Interjected Naruto as came to Tsunami's defense, but just as he was about to wave his hand around the area, he felt a strange shift in the air, one that put his danger sense on full alert. His eyes quickly scanned the area as his right hand inched ever closer to his weapon's pouch. But just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Weird, just what the hell was that feeling anyway? That's not the point, exclaimed Ino, completely oblivious to what just happened, as she shot a glare at Naruto that brought him out of his own thoughts, and when he saw her, he got the message, shut up if you know what's good for you. I know it isn't. He shot back, completely unaffected by her glare since he'd been exposed to his mother's glare before, and Ino's was nothing by comparison. After all, Ino was no Uzumaki Kushina. Naruto turned towards Tsunami and saw that she still didn't quite understand, so he went with what his mother had told him when he was little. What Ino-san is trying to say is that someone might be hiding in order to get information on you so they can hurt you later. So it's best to keep things to yourself. Ino got a smile on her face when she saw that Tsunami was starting to understand. He's right, Tsunami-san, so please don't do it again. After a quick nod from Tsunami, Naruto turned back towards Ino and said, well, could you check their minds? Ino let out a huff of announce but decided to pay back Naruto for helping out that shop clerk and made her way over to the unconscious man, before she cringed at the brutality that was used in subduing him. She quickly and discreetly ran through a series of hand seals and channeled her chakra before she placed her hand on his forehead. She searched his mind for any trace of the purple-haired woman that was Naruto's sister, but after several minutes of searching his mind she found nothing. She then moved over the other one that Fu had thrown into the wall and repeated the process. Once she was finished, she looked over at Naruto with a sad look in her eyes. I'm sorry, Menma, but they've never even seen your sister before. I didn't think it would work. Naruto sighed as he ran his hand through his hair. He then turned towards Fu and said, come on, Fu-chan, let's get going. Fu gave a quick nod of agreement before she pushed herself off the wall and walked over to where Naruto was. Naruto meanwhile had turned back towards Tsunami and Ino and inclined his head as a sign of respect. Thanks for all you help, Tsunami-san, Ino-san. I guess we'll just have to look elsewhere. You're welcome, Menma-san, and I wish you the best of luck in finding your sister. Yeah, I'm just sorry I couldn't have helped you more. After the two groups parted company, Fu kept a close eye on them, and once Ino and Tsunami were out of sight she moved in closer so that no one could hear their conversation. So do we consider this little outing a success? I guess. Naruto sighed as he looked up into the midday sky. I'm sure she doesn't know anything about my sister, but I would have liked to have gotten the chance to learn something about Konoha. So, I don't see what the big deal is. I was hoping to get something, anything that would put my Ka-san's mind at ease. When Fu just gave him a baffled look, he continued. For as long as I can remember, Ka-san has always been afraid that Konoha would never stop until they hunted us down. I was just hoping to find something to prove her wrong. The two fell into an uncomfortable silence after that, with Naruto deep in thought and Fu unsure of just what to say in a situation like this. Then once they were out of the villages and in the surrounding forest, out of the sight of any prying eyes, they took to the treetops. XXXXXXX. A short time later, Naruto and Fu landed in the center of their campsite and immediately noticed that both Kushina and Mei were in the middle of a serious discussion. Naruto approached the pair with a curious expression on his face. What's going, Ka-san? Did you find out what happened to Nei-chan? No, Naruto-kun, we haven't found anything on Anko-chan yet, said Kushina as she felt a pang of sadness at Naruto's crestfallen face. She quickly schooled her features before she continued, however, our contact has told me that Zabuza is planning to attack the bridge builder, a young woman by the name of Tsunami who took over for her father, a man named Tazuna when he was killed, at her bridge tomorrow, and since we did agree to help Mei-san here recruit him. Before she could say any more, Naruto interrupted. We have to put searching for Nei-chan on hold and confront Zabuza at the bridge. Kushina nodded her head in acknowledgement. So I want both you and Fu-chan to be ready for battle. At their confused looks she continued, while Mei and I confront Zabuza, you two will be tasked with running interference with the group that is protecting this bridge builder, understand? When both of them nodded in agreement, Kushina's posture relaxed a little as she said, good, now go and get some rest. We head for the bridge first thing in the morning. XXXXXXXX. The following morning the group had just arrived at the bridge, a massive structure made of stone that spanned the waterway to about halfway to the mainland, only to see that the battle had already commenced. After surveying the battlefield and seeing that the Joinin sensei of this group was engaged in battle with Zabuza while his team was currently struggling against an ice user, Kushina pulled her mask up over her nose before she turned towards Naruto and said, it's time for the marauders to make their appearance. Naruto quickly nodding his head before he raised the mask up over his nose and unsealed a scroll to reveal 3 black trench coats with white flames and a reed sash on the left arm. After Naruto and Kushina put their coats on, Naruto picked up the last trench coat and handed it to Fu. Put this on, Fu-chan. It's our group's MO and shows that you are a proud member of the Marauders. As Fu put on the coat, Kushina noticed something out of the corner of her eye and motioned everyone to stop. Upon closer inspection she saw a large group of mercenaries waiting just out of view of the occupants of the bridge, and at the back of this group was a short stocky man. This man was none other than Gato, and upon his appearance on the battlefield Kushina decided to make a change in the plan. She turned to the rest of her group and said, Naru-kun, you and Fu need to keep Zabuza occupied while me and Mei take care of this scum. Before Mei could offer a word of protest, Kushina shot her a glare. Don't you dare object to this change in plans. You know as well as I that if we don't do something about them this whole thing could go south fast. I was just going to say that I don't think it would take the both of us to take that group down. Mei shot back, aggravated at the fact that Kushina had dressed her down. She was a Joinin too, damn it, and she knows how to read a situation just as well as her. Maybe, but it would be faster with the two of us, and Naruto-kun and Fu are more than capable of keeping Zabuza busy while we do this. Seeing that there was no arguing the matter, Mei signed in aggravation, but nodded her head in agreement before they split into their groups and headed for their respective locations. Meanwhile at the bridge the situation wasn't faring too well for the team from Konoha. Ino looked on helpless from her position of guarding Tsunami as 2 members of her team, a big bone teen and another teen with pineapple-shaped hair, were currently trapped inside a large ice dome fighting for their lives while their team's Jonin leader engaged Zabuza. Then just as the ice user was about to finish off the heavy-set teen, a powerful gust of wind shot through the area with enough force to knock both of the Konoha shinobi out of the ice dome and smack up against the concrete wall lining the edge of the bridge. As those two recovered from the impact, Ino felt a sense of dread well within her as Naruto and Fu landed between herself and the ice user. But that dread soon turned to confusion when she heard a familiar voice come from the blonde. You just keep protecting that old man, Ino-san, we'll take care of the rest. Menma-san, Fu-san, questioned Ino as she was having a hard time trying to understand why those two would even be here, especially since he had told her that they were looking for his sister. Her musings were cut short however as she saw the ice user cancel his ice dome and begin to approach the new arrivals. Fear once again crept into her heart and she started to wonder if Menma was indeed an enemy when she saw the ice user reach Naruto and Fu, and then suddenly embrace Naruto as if he were greeting a long-lost brother. It's good to see you again, Ice Nisan. Ice smiled behind his mask as he said, likewise Fox Otudo, I take it that it's time to finish the operation. Naruto simply nodded his head, an action that not only surprised Fu but Zabuza and the breaded Konoha Jonin as well. So you betrayed us, Haku. I knew you were bad news ever since Gato hired you. Quote. Releasing the embrace, the now identified Haku turned towards Zabuza and coldly stated, "How could I have betrayed you, Zabuza-san, when I was never loyal to you to begin with?" When Zabuza's only response was to glare at Haku, he simply pulled out a scroll and unsealed the contents before he continued on with what he was going to say. "My only loyalty is to the Marauders." As Haku put on the same trench coat that the other members of the Marauders were wearing, Naruto stepped forward. "Just give it up, Zabuza. Your escape route's been cut off, not to mention you're outnumbered. There's really no way out for you." The moment Naruto finished speaking, the three marauders surrounded Zabuza while at the same time keeping one eye on the Konoha shinobi that have regrouped around Tsunami. Said missing nin quickly surveyed his surroundings and tightened his grip on his sword as he stood his ground. "Hey, if you think a bunch of snot-nosed kids are enough to scare me, you're mistaken, even if you are members of the infamous Marauders." While the standoff between the Marauders and Zabuza continued, the Jonin leader of the Konoha team, a breaded man by the name of Asuma, approached the pineapple-shaped-haired boy. "Shikamaru, if we get the chance, I want you and the rest of the team to try and capture one of those black trench coats wearing shinobi." Shikamaru's head snapped around to face his commander, an action that attracted the attention of his fellow teammates, and with a look of utter confusion plastered across his face he muttered, "Asuma-sensei. Why? They've come to our aid. So why attack them? Never forget we are shinobi. Just like an enemy one moment can become a friend the next, a friend one moment can just as easily become an enemy. Besides, it's an order that comes directly from Hokage-sama. We can't disobey." Asuma replied to the stunned faces of his team, but a stern look from him kept them from asking any more questions. That group has disrupted missions in the past and Hokage-sama wants to determine their intentions. "We've encountered them before. I have once from a distance," he answered as he took a puff of his cigarette. "I still don't know how they did it, but they managed to kill the client I was assigned to protect. They did it right under my nose and even gloated about it. Let a note that said, 'Sorry about your luck, maybe next time.' And this justifies us taking one hostage?" Questioned Shikamaru as his keen mind was already coming up with several different ways that this could end badly for them. No, it doesn't. Look, I don't like this either, I really don't, but the Hokage has labeled this as a top priority mission. My only guess as to why they've gotten such a high rating is that they've either cut into the purse strings of the village somehow or have been deemed as a danger to the village. Either scenario isn't good because that would mean they are dangerous, and if they are indeed a threat to the village, we have to deal with them." Shikamaru nodded his head in understanding. If these people were as dangerous as he was being led to believe, then having them move about freely could be very dangerous. Best thing to do in that situation is to gather as much intel as possible, and if capturing on got them the intel they needed, then it was worth the risk. As Shikamaru started to formulate a strategy so that they would accomplish their new mission, the others turned their attention back to the standoff in front of them. Meanwhile, Naruto had realized that Zabuza wasn't just going to surrender to them, and since a fight with the swordsman would be counterproductive to their reason for even interfering with this battle to begin with, he tried to reason with him one more time. "We didn't come here to fight you, Zabuza. In fact, the person that came with us wants to recruit you for a job." "Job?" questioned Zabuza as he arched a non-existent eyebrow. "Sorry kid, but I'm in the middle of a job right now. So if you want me for a job, you'll have to wait until I'm finished with this one." Just then a fat round object landed on the bridge and rolled up to Zabuza's feet. "Sorry, but looks like your other job's been cancelled," said Kushina as she and Mei landed right next to Naruto. Zabuza used his foot to roll the object over only to discover that it was the severed head of his employer Gato. He then looked up at the two newcomers and said, "So it would seem." He then turned his attention to Mei, and as he brought his sword to bear he released an impressive amount of killing intent before he said, "So what's this job offer the brat was talking about, or are you after something else?" Mei stood there unaffected by his attempt to intimidate her, and when she thought she had waited long enough made her proposal. "I'm here representing the resistance to the Mizukage's rule." She then took on a more regal posture in order to show the seriousness of her offer. We'd like you to join us in bringing the Mizukage down. What's in it for me? She took a deep breath to give herself time to mentally go over everything she was allowed to offer the swordsman. Some of the things have been authorized to offer you or pay for an S-rank mission, as well as once we overthrow the Mizukage we will remove your missing nin status. Zabuza remained quiet for a few moments before he said, "Is that all you have to offer?" Taking a chance on just what Zabuza was hinting at, she decided to up the ante. What about a chance to finish what you started? When he didn't give any kind of negative response, she continued, how about giving you another chance at killing Yagura, the Yondaime Mizukage? It took Zabuza only a second to come to his decision. You've got a deal. As the two of them shook hands to seal the deal, Mei turned towards Kushina and said, let's get going. We don't need to stay here any longer than necessary. A quick nod of agreement was Kushina's only reply before she and the rest of the marauders shifted the main focus of their attention from Zabuza to the group of Konoha shinobi that were protecting the bridge builder. She then stepped in front of her fellow marauders before she addressed the Konoha shinobi. As you can see, the danger to your client has been resolved. We have no quarrel with you, so let us leave in peace and we won't have any problems. After a quick incline of the head from Asuma, she turned to address the others. All right, let's move out. We still have that other business to finish up. As the others took off, Naruto felt that same feeling in the air that he felt the other day at the shopkeeper's place. This feeling caused him to hesitate for a second, and look around for the source of the feeling. Damn it! Just what the hell is that? Unfortunately for Naruto, that hesitation was just enough time for him to be the only marauder left on the bridge, and that was a situation that Asuma took full advantage of. Now Shikamaru. What the hell? Shouted Naruto as he found himself unable to move because of a shadow that linked his with Shikamaru's. Kage main no jutsu success. Shikamaru then turned to his other male teammate and said, Choji now. As Naruto struggled to free himself from this jutsu, Choji used a jutsu of his own to enlarge his body before he wrapped Naruto in a bear hug to further restrict his mobility. Satisfied that Naruto's movement was restricted, Asuma turned to Ino. Do it now, Ino. Ino hesitated for a moment as doubt started to creep into her mind. He did help them after all, and it just didn't seem right to attack someone who had just saved your life. Her feelings of uncertainty intensified when she saw the look of betrayal on Naruto's face, as he clearly felt the same way about this as she did, but that look was soon replaced with cold fury at what they had done. How could you? We saved you. Is this how you repay those that came to help? Naruto growled as he struggled against both Choji and Shikamaru's shadow bind, but when none of them even attempted to answer his questions, he came to one inescapable conclusion. My mother was right. Konoha can't be trusted. Ino. Asuma-sensei. Muttered Ino as she was brought out of her shock at what Naruto had just said. She then turned to look at her sensei, and upon seeing the fierce expression on his face, snapped her out of her daze. Right, pull yourself together. She then turned back towards Naruto, and as she brought her hands up to form her family's patented jutsu, she said, sorry, nothing personal. Bullshit. Naruto spat back. But before she could even focus, her chakra, 2 Senbon needles embedded themselves into the neck of her teammate. Shikamaru. Screamed Ino as the pineapple-haired Chunin collapsed to the ground and Naruto found that control of his body had returned to him. He then used the shock of the moment to his advantage. He slammed his head into the face of the heavy-set shinobi holding him, releasing him in the process. Now that Naruto was now free, Asuma saw no other option. With the possibility of his other teammates coming back, he had to disable him, and he had to do it now. So he activated his chakra blades before moving in to incapacitate the young blonde. Only to be surprised to find his blade embedded in the chest of the ice user known as Haku instead of Naruto. Naruto stared in horror as he watched Asuma retract his blade form Haku, only to see blood flow from the wound. As the ice user collapsed to the ground and started to cough up even more blood, Naruto came out of his stupor before he turned towards Asuma with a look of pure and utter hatred burning in his eyes. You bastard. I'll kill you. Asuma instinctively took a step back as the heated glare the blonde teen had on his face reminded the Jonin of another blonde that had been a terror to the enemies of his village. But before either of them could move a muscle, the rest of Naruto's group landed right beside him. Kushina immediately went to check on Haku using the knowledge she's gained while raising them to see how bad his condition was. Seeing this as his chance, Asuma threw down some smoke pellets, and as the smoke covered the area he turned to his team. "We're leaving." He then picked up the unconscious Shikamaru before he channeled his chakra and shunshin away quickly, followed by Choji, who had grabbed Tsunami, while Ino gave one quick glance at Naruto before she followed her team. "You're not getting away from me!" shouted Naruto. However, Naruto's pursuit of the retreating Konoha team was cut short when he heard his mother's voice. "Forget about them, Fox. I need your help now." "But they're getting away," shouted Naruto as he waved his hand in the direction the Konoha team fled. Kushina leveled her gaze at Naruto to show just how serious this was. "If you don't help me, Haku-kun will die." That one statement was like dumping a bucket of ice water over his head. Faster than anyone could blink, Naruto was beside his mother with a determined look on his face. "What do you need me to do?" "Start the process necessary to create a stasis seal," ordered Kushina as she pulled out her own ink and brush before she started to write seals on Haku's forehead. "The stasis seal?" questioned Naruto, his concern etched onto his face as he unsealed his own brush and ink. "Is it really that bad that we have to use that?" Not even bothering to pause in her sealing work, Kushina said, "He's got a punctured lung, several cracked ribs, and internal bleeding. I don't have the skill needed to heal these types of injuries, and if they're not treated soon." "Understood, Ka-san," said Naruto as he began to furiously work on the seal his mother taught him so many years ago. Over the next several minutes, the mother-son duo worked tirelessly to complete the seal, all the while Haku's breathing becomes shallower and shallower. "Just hang in there, Haku-nisan, we're almost done," Naruto mumbled to himself as he moves as fast as he can to complete his part of the sealing array. While the two Uzumakis worked furiously to save the life of their friend F.